Hello, everyone. Welcome to Easy English Listening. Today, we are going to talk about a very common problem in learning English. Many learners study English for years, but they still feel that their vocabulary is small. They learn new words today, but tomorrow they forget them. Sometimes they recognize a word when reading, but when they try to speak, they cannot remember it. Does this happen to you? If the answer is yes, do not worry. You are not alone. Millions of English learners around the world have the same problem. Today, we will explore an important question. Why do English learners forget vocabulary so quickly? And more importantly, how can we remember words better? Let's begin.
First, we need to understand something very important. Vocabulary is the foundation of language. Many students think grammar is the most important part of English, but that is not completely true. Grammar helps organize language, but vocabulary carries meaning. Without vocabulary, communication is impossible. For example, imagine you want to say something simple. I am hungry. If your grammar is not perfect, you might say, me hungry. The sentence is not perfect, but people can still understand you. However, if you do not know the word hungry, you cannot express the idea at all. This shows how important vocabulary is. The more words you know, the easier communication becomes. Vocabulary helps you understand conversations, read books, watch movies, and express your ideas clearly. But learning vocabulary is not always easy. Many learners feel that they study many words, but their vocabulary does not grow. Why does this happen? Let's find out.
One big problem is something called the illusion of learning. This happens when we think we have learned a word, but in reality, we have not. For example, you see a new word. You check the meaning in a dictionary. You read one example sentence. You understand the meaning. At that moment, you feel confident. You think, I know this word now. But a few days later, the word disappears from your memory. Why? Because understanding a word once is not the same as remembering it. Our brain needs repeated exposure. In fact, research suggests that we need to see a word many times before we truly remember it. Sometimes 10 times or even 20 times. Language learning is not a single moment. It is a process. Words slowly become stronger in memory through repetition.
Now, let's talk about memory. The human brain forgets information very quickly. This is normal. In fact, forgetting is part of how the brain works. The brain cannot keep every piece of information forever. So it filters information. It keeps what is important, and it deletes what is not used. If you learn a word today, but never see it again, the brain thinks, this word is not important, so the brain removes it. Scientists call this the forgetting curve. The forgetting curve shows that people forget information very quickly. Within one day, we may forget more than half of new information. Within a week, we may forget almost everything. This sounds discouraging, but there is good news. Every time we review information, the memory becomes stronger. Repetition fights the forgetting curve.
Another reason learners forget vocabulary is learning words without context. Many students memorize words like this. Apple means thou, chair means gay, beautiful means dep.
This method is simple, but it is not very effective. Language does not work with isolated words. Words live inside sentences. They live inside stories. They live inside conversations. For example, instead of learning the word exhausted alone, you can learn it in a sentence. I was exhausted after working all day. Now the word has a situation. The brain can imagine the meaning. Context helps the brain remember words longer. This is why reading and listening are powerful tools for vocabulary learning.
Another interesting idea is the difference between passive vocabulary and active vocabulary. Passive vocabulary includes words you recognize. You understand them when reading or listening, but you do not use them when speaking. Active vocabulary is different. Active vocabulary includes words you can use easily in conversation. Most learners have a large passive vocabulary, but their active vocabulary is smaller. For example, you may understand the word purchase, but when speaking, you say buy. This is normal. Moving words from passive vocabulary to active vocabulary takes practice. You need to speak. You need to write. You need to use the word many times. Only then does the word become part of your active vocabulary.
Many students learn vocabulary from lists. They try to memorize dozens of words every day. But vocabulary lists have several problems. First, they are boring. Second, they lack context. Third, they encourage short-term memorization. Students often memorize the list before a test, but after the test, the words disappear. The brain remembers information better when it has meaning. Stories, conversations, and real situations create meaning. That is why learning vocabulary through reading is much more effective.
Repetition is essential for memory. Learning a word once is not enough. You need to review it many times. But repetition must be spaced over time. For example, you might review a word today, tomorrow, 3 days later, 1 week later, 2 weeks later. This method is called spaced repetition. Spaced repetition helps the brain move information into long-term memory. Many language learning apps use this technique. But you can also do it yourself, with a notebook or flashcards. Emotion also affects memory. People remember emotional experiences better. For example, you easily remember a funny story, a shocking event, or a beautiful moment. But memorizing random vocabulary lists is not emotional. It feels mechanical. Stories, movies, and interesting conversations create emotion. Emotion strengthens memory. This is why many teachers recommend learning English through stories.
The best way to remember vocabulary is to use it. When you use a word in conversation, your brain builds a strong memory connection. Each time you use the word again, the connection becomes stronger. If you never use the word, the connection becomes weak. So try to use new words in speaking and writing. Even simple sentences are helpful. For example, if you learn the word delicious, you can say, "This soup is delicious." Simple usage creates strong memory.
Learning vocabulary takes time. Forgetting words is normal. It happens to every language learner. But understanding how memory works can help you learn more effectively. Remember these ideas. See words many times. Learn words in context. Review regularly. Use the words in real situations. And most importantly, be patient with yourself. Language learning is a long journey. But every word you learn brings you one step closer to fluency. Thank you for listening, and see you in the next English listening practice.